The American Unitarian Association condemned the persecution of Jews in Germany the year that Hitler came to power, 1933. This was an unpopular stand in the United States, which was largely isolationist and anti-Semitic. Nevertheless, we persisted. By the time Germany annexed portions of Czechoslovakia, a model democracy with close ties to American Unitarians, there was a clamor to do something. Within months, the association sent the Reverend Waitsel and Martha Sharp to discover how to assist the hundreds of thousands of refugees pouring into Prague. 3 weeks after their arrival, the Sharps stood in the streets of that city as Nazi troops marched in to take over the whole country. Many of you have heard this story, or at least parts of it, but it bears repeating. Waitsel and Martha left 2 young children behind in the U.S. to undertake a service and discovery mission in Czechoslovakia. And within weeks of arriving, they found themselves in occupied territory with only their American passports to protect them. They could have fled, as certainly I would have done, but they chose to stay. The Sharps raised funds for humanitarian operations, and they carried out their own rescue and relief efforts. Their stories are harrowing. Listen to these final moments of Martha's rescue of a Czech dissident, still known only as Mr. X. Martha and Mr. X walked through wind and snow across Prague. A Nazi soldier stopped them. Martha produced her passport and confidently announced Americans. They were waved across a bridge, then stopped by a soldier on the other side. The passport trick worked again. Just steps outside their destination, the British embassy, a 3rd Gestapo officer stopped them. Martha complained about taxis and being late for a meeting with the embassy secretary. She flashed her passport and demanded the guard tell the secretary that they were there. He waved them ahead to speak to a British guard. He waved them to safety on embassy grounds. So close, so resourceful, so brave. For 5 months, the Sharps helped send Jews, dissidents, children to safety. They left Prague in the summer of 1939 to return to the U.S., forewarned of their likely arrest. Before Waitsel and Martha reached New York, Western Europe was again at war. The Unitarian Service Committee was established with this work already underway. In 1940, the Sharps returned to work with Europe's refugees, operating out of Lisbon, the last escape route out of occupied Europe. They and other service committee members issued papers to help refugees cross national borders. They had no authority whatsoever, which is how and why we got our beloved flaming chalice. It was invented as a brand to give their papers the air of authority and legitimacy. There is so much to celebrate about the proud beginnings of our service committee, but that is not our task today. Suffice it to say that they rescued thousands, and the Sharps are 2 of 6 Americans granted the title of Righteous Among the Nations by the State of Israel. This honor is bestowed by the Jewish people upon a small set of non-Jews who came to their aid during the Holocaust. They describe the righteous as follows. In a world of total moral collapse, there was a small minority who mustered extraordinary courage to uphold human values. These were the righteous among the nations. They stand in stark contrast to the mainstream of indifference and hostility that prevailed during the Holocaust. Contrary to the general trend, these rescuers regarded the Jews as fellow human beings who came within the bounds of their universe of obligation. A world in total moral collapse, yet a few managed to expand their universe of obligation. Now, I haven't said much about the Universalist side of our family, but they too were early allies of Europe's Jews. The Universalists had their own service committee and worked closely with the Unitarians in post-war Europe. The two committees folded into one when our denominations merged. The former CEO of today's Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the Reverend Dr. Bill Schultz, once said, "It is easy to feel small in comparison to Waitzel and Martha Sharp. Not every one of us can set out for war-torn Europe. Not every one of us can visit the refugee camps of Darfur or the U.S. detention camps or God knows where else. But every one of us can be a part of the lives of those who do. Every one of us can be part of the institutions that make such heroism possible. And in that measure, we can claim a degree of kinship with the righteous among the nations." I don't tell you this origin story of heroic lives to intimidate or even to awe you, although a bit of awe is in order. Rather, I aim to illuminate the DNA of today's service committee. The UUSC remains laser-focused on the original mission set actually more than 75 years ago to secure and protect the most fundamental rights for everyone, no exceptions. Most especially, though, and again, true to our beginnings, the UUSC works with people and communities who are denied their rights because of who they are. Women, people of color, refugees, religious minorities, LGBTQ, and so many others. We seek populations who are not served by mainstream human rights organizations. This is a glorious mission. It is perfectly aligned with the core principles of our faith. We have always enlarged the circle of who is in, who is worthy, who is fully human. African slaves of the Confederacy? Yes. Women? Yes. Indigenous people? Yes. Children? Yes. Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Taoists, humanists, atheists, pagans, nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and nuns. Yes. Gays, lesbians, genderqueer, trans, here I am. Here I am in your pulpit in a state that wants to send me back to the closet. In the beautiful words of the Yad Vashem, we have always pushed the bounds of our universe of obligation to include everyone. And in this 21st century, to include all of creation, the interdependent web of life. We should be astonished and humbled by this tradition that now lives or dies with us. The UUSC is also perfectly aligned with our core practices. When someone asks, what is Unitarian Universalism? A complete answer is that we are a covenantal faith. 5 words. We are a covenantal faith. Our faith is defined by relationships, the promises we make with each other, with our larger communities, with life itself, and then how we live into those promises together. UUSC's work is built on eye-to-eye relationships. Remember the Sharps' first assignment. Go to Prague and discover how we can help. Don't assume. Don't form a committee. Go and discover. This is how we operate today. We serve the most marginalized populations, the ones that are beyond the universe of obligation for other human rights organizations, and we do this in relationship with grassroots operations to amplify their impacts with additional resources, money, technology, organizational skills, networks, access, people. This formula of being in eye-to-eye relationships with local groups in the service of the most marginalized does not change. The issues we address do change to meet the needs of the world in real time. Today we address the most wicked human rights dilemmas of our times: economic justice, environmental justice, and rights at risk. Time is short, so we will focus on just one: rights at risk. The UUSC board visits partner organizations every year. Last year, we went to San Antonio to meet with the people of Raíces, the Refugee and Immigration Center for Education and Legal Services. Some of you may be familiar with them. We identified Raíces as a potential partner in 2014 when unaccompanied children fleeing violence were pouring over our southern borders. Raíces was a small organization with a long history of successfully representing immigrants, especially asylum seekers. Their staff interviewed 2,200 of these children and determined that at least 63% qualified for some form of protections. But without competent legal support, less than 1% had an actual chance of succeeding in their claims. I saw some of the legal support these folks were getting without Raíces. In the massive privately run detention centers, Hutto, Dilley, Carnes, court appearances are simply video conference calls. There's no court hearing. There's just a video camera and a terrified refugee alone in a room, maybe with an attorney, probably a stranger. You may have heard that a top judge in the immigration courts, a man who trains other judges, claims that he can teach any 3-year-old enough law to represent themselves. Wow. Yeah, I can't make that up. UUSC has funded Raíces, and we have provided people to help process the thousands who need their services during summer surges. Our volunteers come from all over the country, are all ages, with a vast range of skills, and they stay for weeks at a time. The San Antonio UUs are also working with Raíces to make sure these children and families know that we welcome them. Raíces is in crisis mode right now, trying to protect refugee families from raids. And they do have branches in Dallas and Fort Worth. Just saying. This year, the UUSC board went to Guatemala, one of the most dangerous countries in the world and a significant source of refugees served by Raíces. It's one thing to hear about the refugees' plight in the U.S. It is a whole different thing to hear the stories of what drove them out of their homes and countries in the first place. Non-state actors, international and local gangs, are waging a civil war that would be impossible without official complicity. We met with the executive directors of 2 Central American partner organizations fighting for the most fundamental human rights, the right to live and rule of law. I won't share the names of these organizations because many of our partners cannot be revealed for the safety of the organization and especially the personal safety of the leaders. But these 2 directors, like every other UUSC partner I have ever met, present very humbly in dress and manner, and then they knock your socks off. So accomplished, so committed, and so very courageous. a lot like the Sharps. Their organizations build communities and systems to protect the most vulnerable members of their society, many of whom fled to the U.S. only to be sent back to be tortured or murdered. These two women, leading the organizations that we met, openly speak truth to powers that murder their critics with impunity. They make our problems seem small, and yet all eyes are on us. All eyes are on these United States. What will we do now that our fundamental rights, our rule of law, are at risk? It is our time now, and our burden is heavy. We are citizens of a nation so powerful that we impact generations of people in ways and places we can hardly imagine. Go to South Dallas to see what happens when our cities lose their way. Go to Dilley or Carnes or Hutto to see what happens when our states lose their way. Go to Standing Rock or Guatemala to see what happens when this nation loses its way. I invite you and all UUs I meet to create a personal strategic plan for social activism in a world stumbling towards moral collapse. We can't all be Waitzel or Martha Sharp. We can't all be Raíces attorneys or volunteers. We can't all speak truth to power when torture and murder are proven options. But every one of us can be part of actions and movements and institutions that make heroism possible here and throughout the world. Trish and I spent quite a bit of time learning the words to "Oh Canada" a few months ago. And then we decided to get serious and create a strategic plan for our household. It's a work in progress, but we've identified our focus areas. Protect the rule of law. Protect freedom of the press. Protect the most vulnerable among us and promote deep democracy, civic engagement. Protecting the rule of law and freedom of the press are well beyond our skill sets, so we'll donate according to our means to those who can influence those areas, the ACLU, PBS, others we haven't discovered yet. On the other hand, we can help protect the most vulnerable and promote civic engagement at all levels with our treasure, our talent, and frankly, our time, and frankly, with our very bodies. At the very least, we can show up when it matters, physically and virtually. The UUSC is first on our list for this work. This is where we till the soil that grows the heroes we need today, most of whose names we will never know. The Reverend Bill Schultz, the former CEO I mentioned earlier, said, "I believe that UUSC is quite literally the most effective way to put Unitarian Universalist values to work in the world, to make our faith shine, to make justice roll down like a righteous stream, and to ensure that we are in the vanguard of the torrent." What will you do to make justice roll down like a righteous stream? How will you be in the vanguard to right this city, this state, this nation? Nothing is too small. Nothing is too grand. Whatever is in the realm of your possibilities is perfect. Just take time for faithful discernment. Pray, meditate, investigate. Make it, a religion. Make it part of your covenant with each other. And I believe you will find the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee has an important role to play in your strategy because it was built on our principles, our practices, our values for times just like these. Thank you. Please stand and body your spirit to join in our closing hymn, number 113.